have another speaker with us today, and it's a award-winning business journalist, Amanda Lang. Amanda Lang has been covering business in North America for over 20 years, both as anchor for Bloomberg Television Canada, on Bloomberg North with Amanda Lang, and as CBC's senior business correspondent reporting for its flagship nightly news program, The National. She also hosted The Exchange with Amanda Lang, a daily business program airing on CBC News Network. For 5 years before that, she hosted the Lang-O'Leary Exchange with Kevin O'Leary. And prior to the pair, co-hosted Squeeze Play on BNN for 6 years. Amanda is presently with BNN, Bloomberg, and you can see her daily on TV. So her book, The Power of Why, is her best-selling book, explores the connection between curiosity and success, while her other bestseller, The Beauty of Discomfort, examines how difficult change can be and sets out strategies on how to achieve it. Please help me in welcoming Amanda Lang to the stage, please.
Any questions? Actually, for years now, when I go out and I meet with people, I get a question. It's always the same question, and I don't mean similar or kind of the same. I mean literally word for word. Is Kevin O'Leary really that much of an asshole? I vary my answer according to our mood and my last interaction with him. For many years, I talked to people about a new toaster that I got. I bought this toaster, and the toaster had a timer on it. And toasters are greatly improved by timers. I don't know about you, but I've popped the bread early many times in my life because I couldn't stand to wait another second. I didn't know how long it was going to be in there. It felt like forever. Turns out, when I know it's 23 seconds and the toast will be exactly the way I want it, I'm willing to wait. It's a little bit of human psychology that the toaster manufacturer bothered to figure out. The timer on my toaster became a reminder to me of the kind of innovations that businesses undertake, the really relentless pace of innovations that businesses undertake. And businesses do this, of course, because they want to get a bigger share of the toaster market. They want to be able to charge more for their toaster. They want to make money. It doesn't really matter why they do it. Because they do it, we get a better world. We get better products and better services all the time. But the timer also became a really important reminder to me of something that I really deeply believe, and that is that thirst to make things better is innately human. It's in all of us. Long ago, I came across a chart of the quality of human life, quality of life for human beings over thousands of years. And for thousands of years, the quality of life didn't really change much from one generation to the next. It was basically a flat line. And then there was a moment in history when the quality of our life started to hockey stick straight up. Some of you will know what happened at that moment in history. It was the Gutenberg Press. This clumsy printing devices of Gutenberg changed everything for human beings. Because all of a sudden, information, ideas, experience that previously had been lost, forgotten, literally buried, was suddenly stored, shared, and then it was improved upon. It's the last one that's the most exciting part. It turns out that if you give people information, we want to do something with it. We want to make things better. So we got this galloping increase in prosperity. It became the norm for one generation to give to the next the gift of more, the gift of better, access to wealth and opportunity. So you fast forward to today and you think, okay, if technology and information are the secrets to prosperity, we should be in good shape, and Canada particularly should be in good shape. We've never had more of either, and they're increasing at a rate that's mind-boggling to Gutenberg. And yet, I don't need to tell anybody in this room, that's not our story today. In fact, our story today is that we stand poised as the first generation in this country's history in danger of leaving our children poorer than we are. Not a good legacy. Not the way we want the story to end. But I'll tell you, I don't think that is how it has to end. I believe absolutely passionately that we can change that story. And when I say we, I don't mean big government, politicians, academics. I mean the people in this room can change that story. You know, I know with absolute certainty that everybody in this room has the power to do that. I started looking at what underlies this issue. It's also something you're familiar with. It's Canada's productivity problem. And I know you're all familiar with it because we've had a productivity problem in this country as long as many of us have been alive. And it has been poked and prodded and researched by very bright people, by big government, by academics, by business. We haven't really been able to crack it. And because of that, we've seen our wealth erode over time. And now we stand here with this legacy. So I wanted to figure out how to fix it. I was a business journalist, I'm a parent, I'm a Canadian. It seemed important to figure this out. And so I set out to write a book about it. Now, the funny thing about book publishing these days is it's a really bad business. It's really hard to sell books. So publishers are very keen on people that have any kind of public platform. And they chased me for years to write a book. And for years, I said, I don't want to write a book. I don't need to write a book. I've got nothing to prove. I'm really busy. And then I wanted to write about productivity. And the publisher in question said, Amanda, please do not write about productivity. It's super boring. We're not going to be able to sell it. And my best friend said, we will not read that book. But there was literally a day when I realized that productivity and innovation are two sides of the same coin. If you do one, you get the other. And it was a super exciting day for me because people do want to talk about innovation. We like that subject. It's actually just as hard to get and just as remote as productivity, but it feels more human. And my publisher said, yes, innovation. And my best friend said, we will read that book. So then I said, okay, what is innovation? There are as many definitions of innovation as there are people in this room. My favorite is super simple. It's an old idea meets a new idea and something changes. Something has to change for it to be an innovation. Otherwise, it might be a cool invention, but it changes how we live or think or work. Okay, so then I thought, how do we get innovation? How do we create an environment that allows for innovation? Because this isn't something a mad scientist does in a room. It's something we do in a group. It's something smart businesses do, smart governments do. So I started asking people who seem to have figured it out. What is a culture of innovation? And many years ago, the fellow who ran Cisco in Canada gave me a super simple reply. And he said, all you do to create that environment is create one that allows for why and why not. That's all. And I thought, wow, that's super simple. Why and why not? And then I went away and I realized that's actually really hard. Why and why not are among the most challenging words we have. Why and why not ask us to think about things we weren't thinking about, do things we didn't plan to do, stop doing things we did plan to do. They run in right away to something called the status quo bias in us humans. And the status quo bias, as you may know, is not in our prefrontal cortex. It's not in the smart part of our brain. It occupies the reptilian level of our brain. And the status quo bias says, the thing I've already done, the thing I know how to do, didn't kill me. I'm going to do that again. That thing you want me to do, the ambiguous, the unknown, it's the psychic equivalent of a dark cave. Forget about it. But I thought, okay, what is why or why not? Think about that. In its essence, it's just curiosity. So how do I know, if curiosity is the root of innovation, that every single person in this room is a natural-born innovator? Everybody. Because we were all once 2 years old. Spent time with a toddler lately? Toddlers ask why. Toddlers ask why for a living. Toddlers ask why because it's how the brain works. It's how the brain learns. So I thought, okay, if we ask why with such ferocity at a certain stage of our development that it comes to define that age, where did it go? Now, there's lots of research on this. The one that I found years ago was a joint study from the University of Hawaii and Michigan, and they asked this question: how do adults respond to curiosity? Some horrifying percentage of the time, a caregiver with a toddler responds with a variation of get lost. I don't know, I'm cooking dinner, ask your father. And the researchers asked, why does the caregiver respond that way? Because presumably they care for the child. And the answer is the adult in that scenario sees curiosity as a negative behavior, a stalling tactic, attention seeking. Now, the researchers didn't take the next step to say, why do we think that? I don't think you need a PhD in a social science to say it's because we were once 2 years old, asking questions, and we were shut down. See, right at the age when our curiosity is beyond our control, it bubbles out of us, we also happen to be at a social stage where we see the effect we're having on others. We see our curiosity irritates our mother. Our father leaves the room. I was in an airport not long ago, and there was a family going the other way, mother, father, 2 kids. And I overheard the father say to his son, who was about 6, because I know if I answer it, you'll only ask another one. And I laughed. Anyone who's had a child would laugh. And then I wanted to run after them and stage an intervention. We shut our children's curiosity down. Then we send them to school. How's curiosity at school? I don't have to tell you that our school system was designed for the early industrial era, and that it is now somewhat imperfectly designed for a post-industrial one. Educators know this too. The paradigm in school is the teacher has the answer. She's going to give it to the kids. Or they should get the answer as fast as possible and tell her what it is. Teachers are polled and asked which students they dislike the most. Do you know what they say? The disruptive ones. Guess what those kids are doing? The really disruptive ones aren't just questioning the answer, they're questioning the question. So we send our kids to school and they learn that that curiosity that was unpopular at home now has real-world negative ramifications. It gets them seated at the back, it gets them called on last, it gets them graded poorly. We learn a couple of other things in school that I think is really important to know. That paradigm of teacher is linear. We learn that linearity is to be rewarded. There's one best answer to a question, and speed is the right way to do it. Get your answer fast, we learn. Something else happens at school that I came to see over time that I think is really important. And it came to me through something that happened to my niece. My niece is, she's now 12. But when she was in grade 1, she had a kind of a glorified show and tell. She was supposed to write a speech about something and bring it into class to show her classmates. And Victoria decided to write about her dad. And she found this paper at home, and she wrote, "My dad taught me to read. My dad's teaching me to ride a bike. My dad loves to play golf, and I love my dad." And she brought him in. He's standing beside her at the front of the class. And she gives her presentation to the 6-year-olds, and then she opens it up for Q&A. And the first question is, "Where'd you get that paper?" And the second question is not for her, it's for her dad. "Why are you so tall?" And then the third question is not even a question. The kid says, "I'm the oldest in the class." And the teacher's annoyed. The teacher says, "Does anybody have any questions for Victoria about her presentation?" Now, the thing that's important about this story is not that the teacher could have followed those questions. They're actually not bad questions. She could have followed the kids where they were going and taught them something there. Child-directed learning. There's a whole school, many schools pursue that avenue. But what's important to me about this story is the teacher did something that we do all the time in schools to our children. The message she was giving those 6-year-olds is that there was a right question to ask. Presented with a set of facts, their brains were supposed to come up with a question, and it should have been roughly like the question the kid next to them was going to come up with. Now, that's not just troubling. I actually believe that's soul-destroying. Here's why. When I walked through the world and talked to these people who study and live innovation, the innovators, I think of them, we're all innovators, but these guys are at the step change end. They get kicked out of things. They get into trouble continuously. Their teachers really hated them. One of them said to me, "Style of thinking is the last bastion of diversity." Style of thinking. You know, we're working on gender and race and sexual orientation. We haven't even begun to touch how we think. But how we think is who we are, like nothing else. You know, we've all got a bunch of labels we could assign to ourselves. Most of those could be removed or changed. But as long as our brain can receive information and then process it like just only our brain will, we're us. You're you in a way that's unique to you. Instead of recognizing that, capitalizing on it, celebrating it, from a very early age, we say, "No, try to think like other people." And even worse, what that teacher was saying, your brain did something bad. It's possible to think a bad thing. Soul-destroying. Incidentally, when you fast forward and these kids get into the work life and their employers want them to be more engaged, engagement, of course, is the holy grail of the corporate world. There's like a one-for-one line between an engaged employee and profit. They want engagement. They don't know how to get it. They put beanbag chairs out and free food. I would just posit, I'm not an expert on this, maybe see your employees as the individuals they are. Maybe recognize their style of thinking as beautifully unique as it is. You know, something else that's important about style of thinking, when we want to collaborate, when you want to brainstorm, you have a tendency to grab the people you work with whom you already like. the people you were going to have lunch with anyway. And you go and you get together and you laugh and you have fun and things fly around and it feels great. Don't do that. Grab the people you find vaguely irritating. Because the people you find vaguely irritating, unless they're actually assholes, think differently than you do. And you don't really get them. You don't know why they say the things they do. You don't understand where their questions come from. That's great when you're trying to increase the brain power in the room. So find the people you're not friends with. Because what we do know about work is that why is not welcome there either. Why and why not runs into that status quo bias. But now, when we get into workplaces, government, of course, like anywhere else, is guilty of this. And the bigger the government, the bigger the department, the more guilty it will be, is because status quo bias writ large is systems. So when I started looking at organizations who are having trouble, where inside the organization do you get the roadblocks to innovation, to why and why not? There are three. The single biggest is the boss. Ultimate boss or manager can either facilitate why or why not or shut it down. But the other two biggest culprits that create an anti-why or why not environment are HR and IT. Now, why would that be? HR and IT, two groups designed, dedicated to making us better and smarter at our jobs. It's why they exist. But they are systems driven, and systems do not like a challenge. They do not like being questioned. You don't implement a 10,000 desktop software change only to have somebody say, this could be better. Let's do something else. HR, by definition, has to treat us all the same. It's a system that systemizes us into kind of a mass instead of seeing us for the strange and beautiful individuals that we are. But companies can actually, organizations, allow for, create, design systems that make innovation possible, that make why and why not embedded. One system that I came across that I quite loved, IBM. IBM is a company that really gets the value of ideas. It makes billions of dollars from its patent portfolio alone. So it knows ideas matter. Years ago, the CEO told me a story. They had brought an Indian engineer over, living in New Jersey. He was working on laser cutting technology for wafers. So it was a laser that cut chips. And he's in New Jersey, and he's there for a couple of years, and his wife comes to him, and she says, look, we're here in America, and I think we should embrace American traditions, so this year we're doing American Thanksgiving. And this guy's kind of annoyed by this. He's an engineer. He doesn't like to leave his lab at the best of times. And it's a Thursday afternoon, and he's home in his dining room, surrounded by people he doesn't really want to be with, looking at a turkey he does not want to eat. And he looks at the turkey, and he thinks, I wonder what my laser would do to this turkey leg. Because engineers, scientists, they know there are no bad questions. So this guy takes the turkey leg to work the next day and uses his laser to cut it. And he jots the findings down into his notebook. You know, how deep into the tissue does it go? What's the average temperature? What's the effect on the surrounding tissue? A whole bunch of stuff that has zero bearing on his job, looking at wafer cutting technology. But IBM has a process. They sweep their labs, and they gather their scientists' notebooks, and somebody else who's not in that department looks at what's inside. So you fast forward some period of time, and somebody is going through this crazy, time-wasting afternoon of a turkey leg and a laser, and LASIK eye surgery is born. So time wasting over here, fresh set of ideas, a little less knowledge, and something great happens. Systems can help you. As for the manager, the boss, here's the secret about your curiosity. That curiosity that's been drummed out of you, and it has, believe me, you've seen the numbers. The number of questions a 5-year-old asks versus a 45-year-old. Have you seen the corresponding decrease in the times of day we laugh? It's a marked step. We laugh less often as our curiosity falls. Here we are. We have, because of our parents, because of our teachers, because of bosses along the way, driven our curiosity deep down inside of us. The good news is it is dead easy to reawaken. Here's why. It's how your brain works, and it's how your brain wants to work. It's how we learn. It's how we make things better. It's how we engage with a moment. Any moment can be made better. Why do I use equal instead of Splenda? Instead of doing it by rote, instead of doing it out of habit, we can actually re-engage. And it feels good. It will feel good right away. Your curiosity, you can reawaken just by deciding to. That's the really good news. So I used to go out and I used to talk to people, and I would say, reawaken your curiosity. If we all do this, if we all engage with our life the way we should, stay in the moment the way we should, and stop routinizing and habitualizing our lives, we will solve the productivity problem. You will go back to your desks and municipalities and colleagues, and you will be a different person with a different set of eyes, and Canada's productivity problem will be solved one by one. Now, your curiosity feels good. Other people's curiosity, still kind of annoying. So one challenge is to recognize that. We find other people's curiosity still a threat, a challenge, attention-seeking, a stalling tactic. So permission by people who lead others, or even people in teams, permission to each other to behave this way. Remember, you're going to like your own, you're not going to like theirs. And of course, when it comes to curiosity, it's not why or why not. It's getting the question right. We know this. We know that asking the right question is essential, but we rarely actually take the time to make sure we're doing it. Why? Well, speed and linearity. We were trained to get our answer fast. How often have you asked a question and you get your answer and you're really happy? We're very happy to get an answer to a problem. Neuroscientists call this a feeling of knowingness, that they say is like happiness, sadness. It's a feeling we get when we know something, and it feels good. So we get our answer, and then the answer's not quite working. Something is off. Instead of saying, did I ask the right question, we wrestle with our answer. We're like, this is my answer. It has to work. How can I make this work? The importance of asking the right question was driven home to me by an example one of the innovators gave me. He talks to groups and he coaches them through how to get to this process. And it's a very methodical writing down your question and parsing it out. There's a real kind of science to it. So he has groups write down a problem, always of a personal nature because we relate to those better. And he always has them do it in a how-to format. And he tells the story of a guy in one of his seminars who wrote, "How do I lose weight?" So they sat down and they started to parse out this question, and Claude had some answers for him, questions rather. You know, how much weight do you want to lose? Guy wanted to lose 30 pounds. Have you ever lost weight before? Yes, 25 once, 40 another time. What's your strategy? They worked through this problem, and of course, what they established was that the question this man should ask is not, how do I lose weight? It's, how do I keep the weight off? Why do I regain weight? Now, the difference between those questions is not immaterial. How do I lose weight is linear. It's scientific. My 12-year-old knows the answer. You take in fewer calories than you expend in energy, and you will lose weight. How do I keep the weight off? Why do I regain weight? That's what we would call a complex question. It is definitely not linear. It is not scientific. It's emotional. It's personal. There's more than one answer. It'll vary from person to person. We hate these kinds of questions. We hate them not because we're bad or weak or stupid. We hate them because neurologically we're not equipped for them. You know, neuroscientists say that our brains actually stopped evolving at the agrarian age. They're perfectly evolved for the agrarian age. They think in 10 million years we will have evolved for the complexity of our time. It's fantastic. But we can actually get a leg up on this problem by understanding it. We're wired for linearity, we're wired for speed. Our brains have to be efficient because otherwise they would use all the glucose in our body and we wouldn't be able to do anything else. So that sorting that we do, that rapid sorting, the routinization, the drive home you don't remember, those are all tools we use to make sure we're not sapping our brain of energy. Staying in the moment does take energy. You have to be choosy about how and when and why you're doing it. If you did it every single second, you wouldn't be able to get up off the floor. So we have this neurological impediment against a complex question. So what do you do with complex questions? There's a couple of things we can do off the bat. First of all, admit you have a problem. That is always the first step, it turns out. We have a problem with complexity. Slowing down is the best thing you can do. We want to get to our answer, remember? So if you're wrestling with a big challenge, some problem you want to solve, at work or at home, slow down. Don't expect to get the first answer as the right answer. When you get an answer, question the answer. Play around with it. Sit with it. Know that one of the characteristics of a complex problem is that as you touch it, it changes. It will keep moving on you. You might even get what is one of the right answers. There's more than one right answer for complex problems, and it will change the nature of part of the problem. So understanding that there's this kind of slow process will help you stay with complexity. So this is the why. This is the kind of graduate level of curiosity that we can all bring to this world, and we need to. As we know, complexity is upon us. We still have complicated problems, which are linear problems bolted together, a lot of our world. And by the way, the good news is parts of complex problems are complicated. You can deal with those little pieces. We all know that. When we're wrestling with some big thorny issue, it's often the best strategy to find the pieces you can get at first. This is the world we live in. So the why is important. So I wrote this book. It's called The Power of Why. And I thought, great, I'm all done. That was fantastic. And then I realized after it was out in the world and I went and talked to people about it, it was missing a piece. The piece it was missing is why it is, even when we have our answer. We've done all the hard work. We've reawakened our curiosity. We've brought next level intelligence to what to do with it. We've dealt with complexity. We have our answer. We still don't do anything with it. We don't change. You know, all of us, I'm going to say this with certainty, have a list of things we want to do and don't. Now, I don't mean things we think we should do or people say we should do. I mean, literally, we want to do them, and we don't. And I got really curious about this. Why do we dislike change so much? And again, it goes back to our brains. Our brains find the ambiguity and the uncertainty of the unknown intolerable. The discomfort we feel is neurological. It acts in the reward center of our brain. So again, this is not about being weak or bad or ill-trained. This is a very deeply wired part of our system that does not want us to do the new thing. So then I started to examine, again, just as I had with the first book. There are people who do get this right. There are people who not only manage through the discomfort we feel with change and ambiguity, but actually learn to enjoy it. These are the people who see it, that feeling, it's the same feeling for them, but they've flipped a switch on it where it's now a pleasant one because they know there's a reward coming. They know the good thing comes after this. It's like the muscle burn you get from a good workout. You enjoy that. You shouldn't, but you know it's because you've done something, you've achieved it. These people figured that out. So I thought, okay, let's see if we can look at their stories across the spectrum and see what we can learn. Because we want to figure out the how. The how is change. Once we've got our why done, how is, okay, what are we going to do now? So some of these people have different strategies. Some of them use all of the strategies. But the three I think are most important that I'll share with you today, I call them the 3 M's. It's mindfulness, meaning, and mindset. Mindfulness, I don't mean that in the meditation sense, although I am one of those people who firmly believes we will all be meditating, that our children will meditate the way we work out. The science is so compelling on how good meditation is for the brain. By the way, it's on my list of things I want to do and don't. But that's not what I mean. I mean mindfulness that's much closer to the paying attention kind of mindfulness, which is a form of meditation. But addiction researchers are at the forefront of where neuroscience can help them. And we have a lot to learn from them. And there are various groups using mindfulness in addiction research. One of them is down at UMass. And their success rate in getting people to pay attention is extraordinary. So what you do when you're being mindful is, if you're trying to this is stopping doing something. You pay attention first to the thing you're doing. You know, a smoker for many years has not paid attention to the cigarette that she's smoking. The way it feels, the reason she lit up at that moment, you know, every aspect of that behavior. Just stopping and paying attention to it awakens the brain to things, right, like how unpleasant it is, how it kind of burns in your lungs. That's the first step. The second step is paying attention to how bad it feels not to give in to a craving. You know, addicts describe a craving as a feeling that washes over them like they might die. It's a massive feeling because it's in that reward center of the brain. It's playing on the dopamine. There's cortisol involved. They feel like they might die. And what they're trained to do here is pay very close attention. Get curious about that. Where is that feeling? Are you really going to die? Probably not. By the time you've even stopped to say, what part of my body am I feeling this craving in? It's past. Because it turns out that when you pay attention to something uncomfortable, unless it's like actually a physiological thing, you rob it of its power. So the same is true when you're contemplating a big change, whether you've chosen it or not. You rob it of its power when you sit with it for a second, pay attention, and get a little curious. Is this really going to be so bad? Am I catastrophizing this situation? Because that's what we do. We make it much bigger than it needs to be. So the mindful is very powerful. For smokers, by the way, the success rate at cessation is 5-to-1 of the leading national anti-smoking strategy, just by paying attention. Mindset is super important. People are talking more and more about gratitude, and that is what I mean. Mindset can change everything about how you relate to and then pass through a big change. I came across a fellow, his name's Jim Moss. He's from Waterloo. And Jim was a professional athlete who literally lay down one day for a nap and couldn't walk when he woke up. He'd been struck by a very rare autoimmune virus that starts to act on the extremities and work its way in. His hands and his legs weren't working. He dragged himself to a phone. His first call was to his mother, thousands of miles away. She said, "For God's sake, Jim, call an ambulance." So he hung up on her and called the ambulance. They took him to the hospital. He's living in the States. They had to take a very aggressive action, which was shut down his system. If this virus kept going, it was going to shut down internal organs within days. They had to shut him down, put him in a coma, and kind of reboot him. And it worked. He came back. He was fine. It was gone, but he couldn't walk. He had to relearn to walk. So he's lying in a hospital bed. His living is over. He's never going to be a professional athlete again. His wife, who's pregnant, is home with their 2-year-old. She can't really be around much. He's deep in debt because he's in America, in an American hospital. And he suddenly realizes that gratitude is the answer. He realizes that because he encounters 2 very different people in the course of one day. A nurse on the morning shift is helping him walk to his bathroom. He's decided he will no longer, as he puts it, pee in a jar. He's going to go to the bathroom like a man. But that's a really slow process because he's learning to walk, and he's a big guy. And this nurse is super busy and cranky about this. And so she kind of snaps at him. You know, this is going to take a long time. You're going to have to get used to this. And he's really deflated because she's an expert, and he doesn't want it to take a long time. And then there's a nurse on the afternoon shift who comes in, same thing, also busy, also a slow process, totally different attitude. She says something like, "We're going to get you through this. It's going to take a while, but we'll get there." Neither one of them promised him a short duration. Neither one of them actually gave him any indication of how long they thought it would be. But the one in the morning was super, super pessimistic, and the one in the afternoon was optimistic and made it their job together. And he reflected as he lay back on his bed at the power of the difference. And so, because he's this way, he started to research gratitude, and he started to practice gratitude. And you will also increasingly be hearing from people that we should all practice gratitude every day. Some of you probably got a book for Christmas about this. Practicing gratitude is really easy. You could do it with Post-its, which is what he did. It just involves actually stopping and thinking about what you're grateful for that day. This is a guy in the hospital, deep in debt, nowhere near his family, who can't walk. What's he grateful for? The meatloaf wasn't burned. He sends a note to the kitchen saying, "Thanks for the meatloaf, it was delicious today." The nurses are changing his sheets. They're horrible and rough, but they're slightly better when they're fresh. He sends them a note thanking them for changing the sheets. He's grateful for these things. He starts to see right away that there's a positive feedback loop on his gratitude. The kitchen sends him 2 pieces of meatloaf. The sheets get changed every day. The physiotherapist comes in on her weekend time off to help him learn to walk. So he comes back home, and he starts a company. It's based in Waterloo. It's called Plasticity. You may have heard of it. It's a desktop system that allows businesses to engage with their employees, to measure happiness, and to train us to be more grateful. And a couple of things I think are worth noting. One of them is we don't measure our emotions particularly. It's interesting because we're a race that really loves measuring and quantifying things, and yet this really important part of us, we haven't created any real metrics around. How happy are you? Well, when you sit down at your desktop at Plasticity, it says, rate how happy you are from 1 to 100. So you might sit down and say, well, I yelled at my 12-year-old this morning. There was horrible traffic on the way to work. I was late for my first meeting. I'm a 65. And you sit down the next day, and you just found out your mother has cancer. Now, I don't know what the number changes to. What I do know is I wasn't a 65. I was probably a 90. It starts to give you perspective and measurement on your emotions. This is valuable. You know, Jim and his wife, Jenny, had this 2-year-old. And they started practicing with him, asking him to practice gratitude, and the way that they did it, and I wish I could go back in time and do this with my own son. I do it now, but he's 12. And you bake in this behavior really early. At the end of the day, they would say, What made you happy today? Just one thing that made him happy that day. And in the very beginning of this process, they noticed that he would name something he could see. You know, he's a little kid. He would look around the room and say, oh, the dog is there, or mom's making spaghetti. But it didn't take very long, weeks, before he was mentioning something from early in the day. Now, two things are important about that. They're training their son to seek out positives, to store away gratitude. Well, if you're doing that, you only have so much neural bandwidth. If you're storing the things that make you happy, you're crowding out the negative. You're not looking for the negative. By the way, we have 10 times more neural attention capacity for negative. 10x for bad news over good. Neurologically, biologically, evolutionarily, makes perfect sense. If you miss a banana in a tree, your buddy will get it instead. If you miss the lion, you're dead. So we pay attention to the negative. That's why, by the way, you all complain about how we only report on the crashes, not all the planes that take off. You're the problem. You like those stories better. You pay more attention to them, and we want to sell ads. But crowding out the negative is super powerful. So when you're undergoing a big change, or you're asking people around you to, or it's being thrust upon you by all the forces that are in your world right now, and boy, are there a lot, actually staying in the right mindset is a super powerful tool. What is good? What's happening that's good for me right now, and the people around me, and asking them to do the same thing. Meaning is, as we know, super important in managing change. We will change if it means something to us. We know this intuitively. We've seen the stories. The guy that has hypertension and knows he has to lose weight and stop smoking, and then his dad drops dead of a heart attack, and he does those things the next day. But Harvard Business School did this fascinating study. They had a pool of patients with at-risk behaviors, things like smokers who were about to get emphysema, or heart patients who were hypertense and overweight. 87% of those people couldn't change. Just sit with that for a second. 87% of us would rather die than change. This is powerful stuff. The meaning makes the difference. So finding that in ourselves, and sometimes more importantly, inside an organization, finding it for the group is really important. You know, one of the people that I met who helps coach businesses on organizational change was for many years a psychologist who was a marriage therapist. Clinical psychologist, but he dealt with marriage therapy. And he realized at some point that what he was doing was facilitating change, right? Because if marriage therapy works, people are changing. Hopefully both of them. And he tells this story about a couple who he was working with, Mike and Kathy. And one night, Mike had to go to bed early. He had a big meeting the next morning. He wanted to be well rested. And he's sleeping, and Kathy wakes him up. She says, Mike, it's really cold in here. And he thinks, yeah, it is kind of cold. I'll get you a blanket. And he gets up and he grabs a blanket from the hall for her. Goes back to sleep. A little while later, she wakes him again. It's so cold. He says, okay, hang on. And he goes and he gets her a hot water bottle and brings it back. And he goes to sleep, and she wakes him again. Mike, I don't know what's up, but it is freezing in here. He's like, oh, okay, he needs to sleep. I'm going to deal with this. He goes downstairs, he gets some warm milk, and he brings it up to her. And she says, you know, Mike, when I was a little girl and I told my mother I was cold, she would hold me. And he takes a deep breath, and he's like, Kathy, you said you were cold. I got you a blanket. I got you the hot water bottle. I've got you warm milk. I am not driving across town to get your mother. But this happens all the time. We think we're making ourselves clear, and we are not. Inside organizations where this goes astray, like Mike and Kathy, is on the reward. We reward the wrong things. That sounds super obvious, right? Reward the right thing, and the bad thing won't happen. And yet we persist in rewarding the wrong thing. And I'll give you one example that I love from a telecom company. The CEO told me this story. It's a company he's no longer with. He's with another one. You can figure that out later. He said he realized at some point that his customers hated them. Don't you hate your mobile company, right? It's just, you need them, so you kind of hate them for that reason, and the bill is always shockingly expensive. The customers hated them. But he realized that the people in his call service centers had abysmal engagement. The people who were the front line of dealing with his customers were miserable. So he looked at how they were being rewarded, and they were being rewarded on speed. Employees in these centers are rewarded on how fast they handle a call. The faster, the better. And this guy sort of thought, that doesn't sound right. It's not adding up to anything good. So he said, no more. From now on, you will be rewarded if you solve the problem. And speed is out of the equation. It doesn't matter how long it takes. Ideally, one phone call, but it could be as long as you like. And predictably, the managers of the call centers went berserk. Because the people that managed these folks understood how to hire for this, train for efficiency and speed, their bonuses and everybody else's were tied to this metric. They were suddenly like, what are we doing here? You're crazy. But I think you can guess the outcome of this story. Suddenly, employee engagement went through the roof, and customer satisfaction went through the roof. And this became one of the most popular telecom companies out there. Now, the reason the employee satisfaction went through the roof is pretty simple to understand. Speed and efficiency can be compelling for a short period of time. Some of us are competitive, and we can make that work for ourselves, but not over the long haul. But solving somebody's problem satisfies something deeply human in us. We like doing that. It makes us feel good and useful. It taps something much more important in the reward center than speed. And so the employees became happier. Tapping into the meaning of what they were doing should have been obvious. You're solving problems, not rushing customers off the phone. Can you imagine you call with a problem, and not only is the employee lousy because he's grouchy, but he's rushing you off the phone? Does not add up to a good equation. So the meaning can make all the difference. Those three things are just three strategies that help us tolerate the discomfort we feel. But it helps us get closer to that how. How do we change? How do we help others change? There's another element of this that's really important to understand. It also comes from addiction research. Addiction researchers have a model of change that's 5 stages. You may have heard of Kotter's model of change for business. He hasn't changed it in 50 years. Addiction researchers have this model that I think actually really applies well to people inside any kind of collective that has to undergo change. It's a 5-stage model. It goes from pre-contemplation, that's where you're not thinking about changing. Other people may think you should change, but you're not. To contemplation, where you kind of know you want to change. You're not quite ready yet. You can spend years in this stage. To preparation, this is where you're actually getting your ducks in a row to actually make the step. Interestingly and importantly, I think for us, the shorter amount of time you spend in preparation, the better. The more your success. It's counterintuitive. You might think, spend lots of time there. No. The shorter amount of time, probably because of momentum and meeting. Then you get to action, and action is the part of change that feels good. You get to talk about corporate transformation, and people see that you've stopped doing something they didn't like you doing. It's the pleasant part. And then the final stage, and it's one of the stages of change, is maintenance, because the researchers will insist that change keeps happening. Once you've changed something, you keep not doing it, or you keep doing it, but you have to keep in maintenance. They've since gone back and added a 6th stage that they consider very important, and that's relapse. Relapse in the stages of change model for addicts is not a failure. It's part of the process. Because if you use a relapse properly, it kicks you back. It kicks you back to contemplation or preparation, but if you use the information you got, it actually increases your chances of success. So if you take this model out into our worlds, into our office environments, into the business world, what it suggests is that when we see small failures in change, we should see them as opportunities to learn, not as failures. And we should embed that messaging. We're transforming folks, but we're going to screw up along the way. But let's not hide that. Let's actually pay attention to it and use it. Important messaging comes from that. The other thing I think is important when we're changing and we're asking people to change with us is to remember that we do not change together. Change is not a group activity. We change near each other, but individually. So often companies will unveil a big transformation and expect all of their employees to go through these stages of change at the same pace. But remember, how you think is who you are. You're dealing with all of this very differently. The people around you will deal with it differently. And just acknowledging that has a lot of power. Just saying to people, you're going to have your own pace with this. There are certain things we have to hit. There are certain milestones that you may need to get to as a group. But acknowledging that some may get there at a different rate is important and powerful. So where I came to was the why of change is really important. It's actually not the hard part. The how is the harder part. The how is actually the part of this equation that will let us flourish in this world that changes all the time, this world of complexity and growth and opportunity. If we can get the how right, we can adapt. Adaption is going to be the secret to our success. You know that we're now talking about AQ when it comes to hiring people, not EQ or IQ. Adaption quotient. The good news about millennials is they have it in spades. They had to adapt. The how is harder, but it's so important to get it right. Because once we've done the why and the how, well, we get to the best part of all, and that is, now what? Thank you. Thank you.
Well, Amanda, thank you very much for your presentation. I'm sure you've created a lot of discussion amongst the delegates in the room that'll be around the water cooler when they're thinking about your comments. And you certainly, we appreciate you addressing the Kevin situation, because we were all wondering about that. Anyways, so my sincere thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thanks, guys.